Welcome to a multimedia presentation by Jim Komar, State Soil Scientist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Reno, Nevada. Today, Jim will be speaking about the benefits regenerative agricultural management systems can deliver to Nevada's working lands. The presentation lasts about 20 minutes.
Hey everyone, Jim Komar here from NRCS in Reno, Nevada. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with everyone today on the topic of soils and climate resiliency. It's an important subject area, and I found it actually to be one of the more gratifying areas to engage with land managers of Nevada. Soils are central to managing our working lands for resiliency. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a soil scientist. I think this truth readily reveals itself as you view the 3 video clips that I'll share with you here today. In these short videos, I'll employ one person who I bet you're pretty familiar with, along with a few other guest speakers, to deliver some key messages about regenerative agriculture and our nation's working lands. You'll first hear from a scientist perspective, delivered by none other than my friend Ray Archuleta. Ray has a knack, as you know, for employing simple demonstrations to illustrate the profound connection between our soil resource, water quality, and all things watershed. And you'll hear this message in the practical applications from those who use science and their earned experiences to make a living off of the land. And then finally, I'll bring it back home to focus on the benefits of regenerative agriculture as a framework for managing Nevada's working lands, and how the conservation professionals of NRCS are uniquely positioned to assist them in their efforts. One thing that we all have in common is what we expect our soils to do, the core functions that soil serves in our watersheds. Here's those 5 on the screen: nutrient supply and cycling, physical support, biodiversity and habitat, filtering functions, and lastly, the regulation of flow of water through our watersheds. But do you know what's really doing the work of preparing our soils for success? It's the soil biology, that herd of soil life, the underground livestock that lives and works under our feet. Consciously or otherwise, every farmer and rancher manages livestock on their land. Regenerative practices, then, are all about managing the soil biology, the livestock, and their food supply, their shelter, their air, and their water. The simple secret, gleaned from hundreds and hundreds of years of trial and error across the world, is that 90% of the soil function is governed by the soil life under our feet. That's it. It's no more or no less complicated than that. So when we speak to the idea of optimizing our soil function, the key metric turns out to be how we manage the most invisible component of the life that lives within our ecosystems. Let's turn now to Ray Archuleta to learn more about this critical element, as Ray uses a couple simple soil demonstrations to help illustrate the point.
What you do is you collect your soil, one from the area you do a lot of tillage and the area you don't do a lot of tillage. This particular soil came from Ray Steyer's farm, and he has been doing no-till for 40 years. The only piece of equipment he runs there is a sprayer or a no-till drill. This one, it comes from the neighbors. Same soil type, by the way, and he grows vegetables continuously, year after year after year. That's the major difference between the soils. As you can notice, the color, it's quite different. This one's darker, this one's lighter. So the way this test works is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place both these aggregates inside the water. In each aggregate, there's billions and billions of pore spaces. As I place them into the water is going to rush in to fill those pore spaces. And what we want to see is, will this aggregate hold against those forces and not fall apart? Okay. The contrast here is, notice that the jar is clear here. This one is not clear. Notice how the aggregate completely fell apart. What this means is the soil pores are collapsed on this particular aggregate. This ones are still intact. What's so important about that is the more pore spaces you have in the soil system, the better the infiltration. The colors differentiation between the two glass cylinders. One is clear and one still clouded with suspended clay particles. This one is still clear, and notice the aggregate's still intact for the most part. Some of it fell to the bottom, but still a majority of it's still intact. And the reason for that is that a lot of these biological cementing glues are hydrophobic. They can repel water, but yet they still hold the particles together. This one here had very, very little, no cementing agents, no biological glues holding it, so all of it fell apart and landed up in the bottom of the glass cylinder.
Now, imagine if the nasty exploding clod that Ray had collected from Ray Steyer's neighbor, a field managed under continuous vegetables using conventional tillage methods. Imagine if that was your neighbor's field here in the Carson River Basin. How well would you say that the livestock are being managed on that land? How well would this field hold up in a rainstorm? Let's go back to Ray and find out more about that concept.
I use this test, it's called the miniature rain simulator, to build upon the point of the slake test. The slake test and the rain simulator test are very related. When you have no pore space, you have no infiltration. So this whole demo is to show what happens when you have poor infiltration. So I collected the soil from a conventional till system, agro system, and a no-till agro system. The difference between these two systems, this one has not been tilled in 40 years. This one's continuously tilled every year to grow vegetables. Same soil types, but what we want to do is we want to show which one infiltrates first, which one goes through that profile. Notice that the soils are, the jars are plastic jars, yarn jars. I filled up a quarter of the way up on both jars. What we're going to do is we're going to pour this colored water. One is blue and one is blue red. That's it's just plain colored water. And the only reason I do that is to show the water column building up as we pour in. And what we have here is that we have two little plastic containers that we're going to simulate the rain. Notice in the no-till system how the water infiltrated through the whole profile. Notice on this side the water is still standing up in a column. This shows that in most of our watersheds we have an infiltration problem, not a runoff problem. And what I mean by that is if we focus on the infiltration problem, on soil health, soil function, then we will focus on what we have to do to make that soil healthy. Notice on this one, the water will go through the soil, and from the soil it'll go right into the lakes, into the rivers, into the lakes. This one here, the water will shut off the land, take all the fertilizer and all the pesticides with it. So this one, notice how it has not infiltrated through. Look at this one. And this, now what causes this is when you do tillage, the zygomycosis bacteria will start breaking down all the glues that hold the particles together, the soil structure together, and the pore spaces collapse. You remember on the slake test how the soil fell apart? Well, there's no glues to hold the particles together, and this is exactly what happens. There's no pore space. This one has pore space, lots and lots of pore space. The soil is held intact by the glues created by all the organisms, soil organisms. This one does not. The water right here ran off into our rivers and into our lakes. This is to show us what happens when our soils do not function properly. Our soils have this incredible way of working. They not only infiltrate water, but they also capture water because of the organic matter. Soils have this incredible ability to filtrate and to capture. Healthy soil systems not only capture and hold water better, but they also allow it to pass through. In unhealthy soil systems, that's not the case. Our soils are designed to filtrate and to clean our waters. So that's part of that whole process. The whole picture here really is, the takeaway is that we want water in the soil system. And that's why when it rains 1 inch, we're going to get all that 1 inch. You're not losing anything. That's the beauty about this. It shows that you're capturing all the water so that when droughts do come, that you can capture every precious inch of water. That's the whole thing.
What a great message from Ray. So now let's head over to Grant County, Minnesota to hear from 2 sets of producers that bring a practical perspective to regenerative management outcomes, starting with Mark Erickson in the first video, and then immediately followed by Amanda and Adam Bedke.
So I'm Mark Erickson, and the operation that we've named our ranch here the Boss Ridge Ranch. I started conventionally farming here in 1994, doing conventional corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. In the mid to late 2000s, grain prices were pretty poor, so we transitioned the farm to all grass, all beef, beginning in 2007, and by 2010 we were completely converted to all grass and all beef. It takes almost 10 years for the land to reestablish itself as grassland, which of course this is what it was before, the tall grass prairie. And of course, as an operator, you have to get re-educated in how you think about so many different things to make this work. And so most of this farm does not have tile lines in it. And so it takes a while for the grassland to develop a deep root system which will allow the water to all go down instead of pooling or running off. And you have to have the organic matter built up in that, from the grass roots and so on, to get the proper soil structure so that it can hold the water. So what was happening in 2012, 13, 14, 15 is the water here would go down, but it would keep going. And the difference is now, when we've had the dry spells this year, the pastures haven't gone dormant because we have that mulch layer to keep the soil cool and to prevent evaporation, and also because we have that soil structure that will hold the water so it doesn't keep going down into the subsurface. And that was a big part of the learning curve that I didn't understand the first few years after we planted grass. Is if it's dry, your grass is going to go dormant because you don't have the mulch and you don't have the organic matter required to hold the water. And so now we're getting pretty comfortable with where the land is at, and the water's not pooling anywheres anymore, and it's all even with heavy rains, it sits for a very short time. We don't have any drowned out spots on the farm at all anymore, and there's no runoff, so we're able to harvest all the water. So I think the non-farmers, if they can support that, would be very helpful. And basically, you support that with your spending habits and your living.
The pasture we're in here is, this was seeded as a hay field in spring of '05. And I was all ready to plow this because you need X number of acres of corn because I want this much corn. And after morning chores, I was hooked on the plow. I came out on the four-wheeler and opened up pasture wires and just went to loop around to turn around. And I looked down and just, I had an aha moment. It was so thick that I almost had a moral dilemma plowing it. Long story short, I didn't plow it that year. But you cannot kill this grass. It holds up. There's zero out-of-pocket dollars reinvested into this, and it just keeps growing. Sometimes it's easier to just show what things look like how that slate tests show. It just holds the soil in place too. As far as there is no erosion. You have to be flexible because you can plant the same thing every year, but every growing year is different. Every harvest season is different, even though whether it's grazing or haying. And obviously, the more you can keep stuff growing out there, just the better the plants are going to do, and ultimately the soil. Well, rye they don't graze. That feeds the soil, feeds keeps the mycorrhizal going. Is you do have to. That's part of the not buying fertilizer. You still have to give the soil the tools to help them where you can. So it's not always a waste leaving it out there. And I think that helps build the soil also. And I also don't have to cut a check out of pocket for that.
I mean, right now, feeding our cows is a, 5-minute project. It's changing pasture wires and dumping some corn in front of our cows, and the time that saves, Adam's in the house with the kids more, or we're outside with our kids more.
It grows every year. You don't have a pile of expense into it, and the government doesn't have to subsidize it, and it's cleaning water. And again, the dirt's not washing away, and you have a crop you're harvesting and getting revenue off of it. It's so simple that it just blows my mind how it isn't everywhere.
Okay, I'm back with you now. So the messages that I want to share with you today from these experiences is simple. Regenerative practices in partnership with our underground herd can rebuild a soil's capacity to regulate the flow of water through our watersheds. I hear that regenerative management systems acknowledge diversity as the mightiest weapon against the forces of nature. Regenerative management practices can build up our carbon soil stocks again, that food source for the soil biology that's in charge of all the soil functioning. Reversing the loss of our topsoil across the country, and unlocking the full capacity of our soil life to do their job of restoring the soil's native capacity to feed soil life and all that's connected to it. Our working farms and ranches are succeeding by connecting human needs with what their environment can sustainably give them. To me, there's very little horse sense in investing either too little or too much in the land before you know what your soil system needs and why. The conservation professionals at NRCS are here to help you with that. When you invite the NRCS out, we'll help you identify what's working well and not working well on your pastures and fields. NRCS will help you dig deeper when the situation warrants, evaluating your soil's health, even helping you collect soil samples to get some lab work done. Then the conservation professionals will build a plan with you that gets you on track to meet your individual goals, all at a pace that matches your needs. To start your journey, contact your district conservationist on this list at the local NRCS office that's nearest to you. As you can see, we have offices in Minden, Yerington, Fallon, Lovelock, Winnemucca, Elko, Ely, and Las Vegas, as well as our state office in Reno, Nevada. Or you can reach out to me using the contact information you see here on the screen. Look, here's to planning for healthy lands, healthy food, and healthy people. And thank you from all of us here at NRCS Nevada. And be sure to reach out when you're ready to make regenerative management systems work for you on your land. Take care.